The small cardboard box left at the sanctuary gates should have contained just another abandoned kitten. But when 3-month-old Scout escaped a secure room and somehow found his way into the habitat of Ghost, a traumatized snow leopard who had not responded to another living creature in 2 years, something impossible happened. The massive predator, whose mother had been killed by poachers and who had spent 24 months staring blankly at distant mountains, did something that made every wildlife expert question everything they knew about animal behavior. Ghost lowered his enormous head to the tiny white kitten between his paws and made a sound he had never made since his rescue. A gentle chuff.
Scout,
the vocalization snow leopard mothers use to comfort their cubs. If you love stories about the incredible bonds that form between animals against all odds, please subscribe to Wild Heart Stories. Your subscription helps us share more emotional tales about animal connections and strengthens our community dedicated to celebrating the extraordinary relationships of the animal kingdom. Ghost had arrived at Mountain Haven Wildlife Sanctuary in Montana 2 years earlier at just 8 months old. International police had intercepted wildlife traffickers attempting to sell him to a Russian collector. His mother lay dead in a Himalayan cave, killed by the same poachers who had stolen her cub. The trauma left Ghost emotionally unreachable. He ate when fed, tolerated veterinary care, but never truly engaged with anything. Dr. Rebecca Chun, the sanctuary director, had tried everything over those 2 years. Enrichment toys, behavioral specialists, even attempts to house Ghost with other rescued felines. Nothing worked. Ghost would lie on his observation rock for hours, staring at the mountains with pale green eyes that held no light, no curiosity, no connection to the present moment. Gavin Martinez, the head keeper, had spent countless hours trying to reach the beautiful snow leopard. Ghost's thick silver-gray coat, marked with black rosettes, was pristine, his physical health excellent. But behind those glacial eyes was an emptiness that no medical examination could diagnose. It was as if Ghost's spirit had died with his mother, leaving only a magnificent shell going through the motions of survival. Staff members spoke about Ghost in hushed, sad tones. He had become a living reminder that some trauma was too deep to heal, that sometimes rescue was not enough. On that October morning, when Jennifer Harrison found the cardboard box at the sanctuary entrance, she had no idea she was about to discover the key to unlocking Ghost's frozen heart. Inside the box was a completely white kitten with bright blue eyes who showed no fear, only curiosity. Unlike most abandoned animals who arrived terrified and sick, this kitten seemed healthy and remarkably confident. When Jennifer opened the carrier to transfer him, the small cat immediately began exploring, treating the situation as an adventure rather than a crisis. Kevin suggested the name Scout, which perfectly captured the kitten's bold, inquisitive nature. Scout was placed in the quarantine facility, a building with glass wall rooms designed for new arrivals. Dr. Lisa Matthews examined him and found excellent health. The plan was simple. Complete the 30-day quarantine, then transfer Scout to an appropriate adoption organization. But Scout had other plans. The quarantine rooms had been designed to contain a wide variety of species, yet somehow Scout found a tiny gap in a ventilation grate and squeezed through. A facility-wide search began immediately. Staff checked every building, every hiding spot, calling for the small white kitten. As afternoon turned to evening and temperatures dropped, just as darkness was falling, Thomas Wilson radioed from the large carnivore section. His voice carried disbelief. "There's a small white animal inside Ghost habitat." Kevin grabbed emergency equipment and sprinted toward Ghost enclosure, his mind racing through terrible scenarios. If Scout had gotten in with the snow leopard, they were likely too late. But when Kevin reached the observation area and looked into the habitat, what he saw made him question his own eyes. Ghost was lying on his usual rock in his typical position, staring at the mountains, and curled between the snow leopard's enormous front paws, sleeping peacefully with Scout. The tiny white kitten looked impossibly small against Ghost's bulk, yet utterly safe. Kevin's instinct was to call for immediate intervention, tranquilize Ghost, and rescue the kitten. But something made him pause. Ghost showed none of the body language of a predator viewing prey. No tension, no focused staring, no preparation to strike. His posture was essentially unchanged from his normal resting position. His extraordinarily long, thick tail was curved slightly around Scout, not as an active embrace, but as a passive boundary. Most remarkably, Ghost's eyes, which normally remained fixed on distant mountains regardless of what happened around him, kept flicking down toward Scout, then back to mountains, then down again. Dr. Chen arrived within minutes and observed through binoculars. After 20 minutes, she noted crucial facts. Ghost's pupils were not dilated for hunting. His muscles showed no tension. His breathing remained slow and steady, indicating complete relaxation. Scout was in deep, genuine sleep, the kind that only happens when an animal feels entirely safe. As the temperature dropped toward freezing, a decision had to be made. They could not leave Scout in the enclosure overnight, but retrieving him without traumatizing both animals would be complex. Kevin tried using aromatic kitten food to lure Scout toward the observation area. After several minutes, Scout began to stir, stretched, and took one step toward the offered food. Then he paused and looked back at Ghost. The snow leopard had also shifted position slightly, watching the kitten's movements. Then Ghost did something none of the staff had ever witnessed. He vocalized. Not a roar or growl, but a soft chuff, the non-threatening sound big cats use to communicate peaceful intentions, particularly between mothers and cubs. Scout responded by turning completely away from Kevin and the food. The kitten walked back to Ghost, settled between the snow leopard's front legs, and began purring loudly enough to be audible from a distance. Dr. Chen called an emergency staff meeting right there at the observation area. The situation was unprecedented. Ghost, who had shown no interest in any living thing for 2 years, was clearly engaging in protective behavior. Scout, who should have been terrified, instead viewed Ghost as a source of safety. Separating them would cause distress to both animals, but allowing them to remain together posed obvious safety concerns. After intense but brief debate, Dr. Chen made the decision. They would monitor through the night using security cameras, with staff ready to intervene immediately if Ghost showed any threatening behavior. For now, they would allow this impossible partnership to continue. Throughout the night, staff rotated observation duty hour after hour. The scene remained unchanged. Ghost stayed on his rock, body curved protectively around Scout. Around midnight, when temperatures dropped to near freezing, Ghost stood up carefully. Scout woke and looked confused. Ghost made another soft chuff, then began walking slowly toward the heated indoor den. After a moment, Scout followed. Ghost had refused to use his heated cave for 2 years except during severe storms. But on this night, he walked deliberately inside and positioned himself on a platform. Scout scrambled up beside him, and within minutes both were sleeping. Ghost's long tail curled around Scout like a blanket. Morning came with Dr. Chen reviewing all overnight footage. Hours of peaceful coexistence, with Ghost demonstrating patience and gentle care that seemed impossible for an animal who had been emotionally unreachable for years. Ghost was not merely tolerating Scout. He was actively protecting and comforting the small cat. The question now was, what to do next? The obvious answer was separation for safety reasons. But Ghost had taken his first steps out of emotional isolation because of Scout's presence. Removing the kitten might send the snow leopard back into the unreachable state he had occupied for 2 years, potentially making his condition worse. Dr. Chen convened an emergency board meeting. The discussion was contentious. Some felt safety had to be paramount and separation was the only responsible choice. Others argued that the breakthrough in Ghost's behavior represented an opportunity that might never come again. After 3 hours, a compromise was reached. Scout would be separated from Ghost using a clear acrylic barrier that would allow them to see and smell each other while preventing physical contact. If both animals showed severe distress, the plan would be reassessed. The temporary acrylic panel was installed that afternoon. Staff entered during Ghost's feeding time, hoping food would keep him calm. But as they approached with Scout in a carrier, Ghost positioned himself between his rock and the approaching humans, not aggressively, but as a clear barrier. He was protecting Scout. Kevin spoke softly, using the calm voice Ghost had heard for 2 years. When Dr. Matthews opened the carrier to place Scout in the separated area, the kitten immediately tried to climb back toward Ghost. It took several minutes to get Scout into the separated section. The moment Scout realized he could not reach Ghost directly, the kitten began vocalizing. Ghost responded with chuffs and soft calls. The snow leopard approached the barrier and pressed his nose against it, while Scout did the same from his side. They could see each other clearly, smell each other through ventilation gaps, but could not make physical contact. For the next 48 hours, both animals remained fixated on the barrier. Ghost abandoned his observation rock entirely, spending all his time pressed against the acrylic panel. Scout mirrored this from his side. Neither showed interest in food or anything else. They simply waited. On the third day, Dr. Kitten made her decision. She had consulted with specialists, reviewed countless hours of footage, considered every risk. Sometimes the most responsible choice was also the most unconventional one. Mountain Haven was about to set a precedent that would influence how people thought about animal welfare and interspecies relationships. Ghost and Scout were going to be allowed to remain together, with modifications to make their unique situation as safe as possible while honoring the bond that had formed between them. The acrylic barrier was removed that afternoon. Both animals reunited with an intensity of relief that was palpable. Scout climbed onto Ghost's face, rubbing against the snow leopard's chin while purring. Ghost responded with gentle chuffs and began grooming Scout with his enormous tongue, an action performed with such careful gentleness that the kitten clearly enjoyed it. The impossible family had been made official. Allowing Ghost and Scout to remain together required immediate action. Dr. Kitten assembled a team to design safety systems that would minimize risks while permitting interaction. Multiple panic buttons were installed around the enclosure perimeter. High-resolution cameras with motion detection and artificial intelligence monitoring were programmed to alert staff if movement patterns suggested predatory behavior. A veterinary response team was designated for 24-hour on-call duty. Staff schedules were modified to ensure someone trained in big cat behavior was always monitoring Ghost and Scout during daylight hours. Small escape routes were constructed throughout the habitat, sized precisely to allow a kitten to pass through, but too small for a snow leopard. These led to secure areas where Scout could retreat if threatened. Elevated platforms and climbing structures scaled for a small cat gave Scout vertical spaces, where Ghost size made him less mobile. The modifications provided safety without fundamentally changing the environment Ghost needed. During the first week, Dr. Patricia Morgan, the sanctuary behaviorist, maintained detailed notes on every interaction. What emerged was a picture of remarkable gentleness from Ghost and fearless affection from Scout. Scout treated the massive snow leopard like a combination of jungle gym, security blanket, and playmate. The kitten would climb on Ghost's head, attack his tail, sleep sprawled across his back, and generally behave as if the 100-pound weight difference was irrelevant. Ghost's responses amazed the staff. The snow leopard demonstrated extraordinary patience and awareness of his own strength. When Scout pounced on Ghost's tail with tiny teeth, Ghost would move it slowly and deliberately, never with quick motions that might send the kitten flying. When Scout accidentally poked Ghost's eye or ear while climbing, Ghost would carefully shift position rather than shaking him off forcefully. The transformation in Ghost's overall behavior extended far beyond his interactions with Scout. For the first time since arrival, the snow leopard began displaying natural behaviors that had been absent. He started scent marking various points in his habitat, rubbing his face against rocks and trees. This was normal territorial behavior, but something Ghost had never done during 2 years at Mountain Haven. He began using more vertical space, climbing to high points apparently for simple pleasure. He investigated enrichment items ignored for months, batting at toys and examining puzzle feeders with genuine curiosity. Kevin noticed Ghost's relationship with humans had also changed dramatically. The snow leopard still maintained natural wariness, but no longer actively avoided human presence. During feeding times, instead of waiting for staff to leave, Ghost would now eat while keepers were visible. Most significantly, Ghost began responding to his name. When Kevin called, the snow leopard's ears would rotate toward the sound, and he would often look directly at whoever was speaking. These were small changes, but for Ghost they represented monumental progress from the unreachable state he had occupied for 2 years. The relationship between the two cats developed distinct patterns. Mornings began with Ghost moving to his observation rock shortly after sunrise, but now Scout accompanied him. The kitten would climb up to the rock's surface, sometimes requiring assistance from Ghost, who would lower himself to provide a stepping platform and settle beside the massive snow leopard. They would sit together, Ghost's pale green eyes fixed on distant mountains, while Scout's bright blue eyes tracked birds, leaves, or any stimuli in his environment. To observers, it looked like meditation with very different focus levels from the two participants. Afternoons brought more active interaction. Scout's energy peaked during midday, and he would initiate play sessions with Ghost through various tactics, sometimes launching himself at Ghost's tail end, wrestling with it, other times hiding behind rocks and attempting to ambush the snow leopard as he walked past. The breakthrough came during the third week, when Scout was engaged in his usual tail hunting. Ghost, who had previously simply allowed Scout to attack without responding, suddenly moved his tail in a sweeping motion that caused Scout to tumble, then gently pinned the kitten with one enormous paw. Scout responded with intense excitement, squirming and batting at Ghost's paw. After a moment, Ghost released him, and Scout immediately crouched in the play bow, inviting more interaction. Ghost responded by lowering his front end in a similar posture. What followed was careful play wrestling, with Ghost allowing Scout to attack while using minimal force in return, always aware of the fragility of his tiny opponent. Staff members who witnessed this were moved to tears. Ghost was playing. The traumatized snow leopard, who had been emotionally unreachable, was engaging in joyful, voluntary play behavior. One fearless kitten had accomplished what 2 years of professional intervention could not. As autumn deepened into early winter, new challenges emerged. Ghost's thick double coat made him perfectly adapted to cold temperatures, but Scout was a domestic shorthair with a thin coat designed for indoor living. His small body made him vulnerable to cold stress. The heated indoor den could accommodate both animals, but Ghost's historical reluctance to use the space created uncertainty. Dr. Chen's team developed a plan. They would encourage both animals to spend more time in the heated den through positive reinforcement. Food would be offered inside rather than outdoors. Comfortable bedding and enrichment items would be placed in the indoor space. The first truly cold night arrived in mid-November, temperatures dropping to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Staff maintained vigilant watch. Ghost remained outside until nearly midnight, with Scout pressed against his belly for warmth. But as temperatures continued dropping, something remarkable happened. Ghost stood up carefully, ensuring Scout was awake and alert. Then the snow leopard began walking slowly toward the heated den entrance. He paused every few steps and looked back, clearly checking that Scout was following. The kitten trotted along behind, without hesitation. Inside, Ghost selected a raised platform and settled onto it. Scout immediately burrowed into the thick fur of Ghost's belly. Within minutes, both were asleep. This pattern repeated over subsequent cold nights. Ghost seemed to have an internal gauge that told him when conditions had become too harsh for Scout. On moderately cold evenings, they remained outside, with Scout snuggling closer for warmth. But when temperatures dropped to dangerous levels, Ghost would reliably guide Scout to the indoor heated area. The snow leopard had become a responsive caregiver, making real-time decisions about his charge's well-being and adjusting his behavior accordingly. This level of cognitive awareness and cross-species empathy exceeded what many experts believed possible. Dr. Matthews conducted a complete physical examination of Ghost during this period. The veterinarian noted improvements across multiple health markers. Ghost's muscle tone was excellent, suggesting increased activity. Heart rate and respiratory function were optimal. Most intriguing, stress hormone levels measured through blood tests had decreased significantly compared to samples taken 6 months earlier. From a purely physical health standpoint, Scout's presence was having measurably positive effects on Ghost. Scout was also thriving. Monthly weigh-ins showed steady, healthy growth. His coat remained shiny, eyes bright. He showed no behavioral signs of stress or fear. The sanctuary began attracting attention from the broader animal welfare community as word spread. Researchers requested permission to study the relationship. Media outlets wanted features. Conservation organizations saw educational value. After consultation, Dr. Chen agreed to allow a limited documentary project. A small film crew would set up remote cameras to capture footage over 3 months. The crew would not have direct access to the animals and could not influence behaviors. The project would be terminated immediately if either animal showed stress from the additional camera presence. December brought harsh winter weather. Snow covered the sanctuary grounds. transforming the landscape. For Ghost, this was the environment he was born for. Snow leopards perfectly adapted to snowy mountain conditions. Ghost moved through snow with obvious joy. The first time staff had seen him display happiness in response to his physical environment, he would plunge into drifts, roll in powder, and leap from rock to rock with magnificent athleticism. Scout's relationship with snow was more complicated. The kitten was fascinated but did not enjoy being cold or wet. His solution: use Ghost as a vehicle and viewing platform. Scout would climb onto Ghost's back and ride as the snow leopard moved through deeper snow. Staff captured hundreds of photographs of the two animals in snow. The massive silver-gray snow leopard with distinctive black rosettes moving through deep snow, with a tiny white kitten riding on his back or nestled in his fur. The visual contrast was striking, but what made the images remarkable was the obvious care and affection in every interaction. These were not photographs of tolerance. They were images of genuine companionship expressed between two beings who should have been impossible partners. The documentary crew's remote cameras captured behaviors even attentive staff had not witnessed. One sequence showed Ghost creating a path through snow for Scout. After a heavy overnight fall, Ghost noticed the kitten's reluctance about deep snow and returned to the den entrance. The snow leopard then proceeded to compress the snow with his paws and body, creating a trail Scout could navigate without wading through drifts taller than his body. Once the path was established, Ghost paused and looked back, clearly inviting Scout to follow. Another remarkable sequence captured Scout's first encounter with falling snow. The kitten was initially confused, attempting to catch flakes and showing surprise when they melted. Scout's playful attacks on falling snow attracted Ghost's attention. The snow leopard watched, then began deliberately batting at falling snowflakes with his paw, demonstrating the behavior. The two animals proceeded to hunt snowflakes together, an activity with no practical purpose, but clearly a bonding experience. Ghost was not just protecting Scout. The snow leopard was actively engaging in social play, teaching through demonstration, and finding joy in shared experiences. As winter progressed, an anonymous donor, moved by news coverage, provided a substantial grant specifically for expanding Ghost and Scout's habitat. The donation funded significant construction, an enlarged heated den with multiple rooms, additional outdoor structures, and state-of-the-art monitoring systems. Dr. Chin worked with designers to create plans giving both animals more space while maintaining security protocols. The design incorporated feedback from months of observation, including features catering to behaviors Ghost and Scout had developed. Construction was scheduled for brief periods when both animals could be temporarily housed in a backup facility. The new observation rock was larger, with a spot perfectly sized for Scout to sit beside Ghost during morning viewing. Multiple heated platforms at various heights gave Scout warm places to rest near Ghost. The outdoor area received climbing structures accommodating both a 100-pound snow leopard and a small domestic cat. Water features included streams Ghost could wade through and smaller pools scaled for Scout. Throughout construction, Ghost and Scout's bond continued deepening. The two animals had developed sophisticated communication. Ghost had vocalizations used specifically with Scout, different from sounds made in other contexts. Soft chuffs that seemed to mean everything is safe, louder calls when Scout wandered from sight, a specific purr-like sound Ghost made only when grooming Scout. Scout had also developed specialized communication with Ghost. The kitten's normal meow, used with humans, was rarely directed at the snow leopard. Instead, Scout used chirps, trills, and soft sounds Ghost seemed to understand consistently. Dr. Morgan published a preliminary paper on her observations, focusing on cognitive and emotional implications. Her analysis suggested both animals displayed levels of empathy, communication, and social awareness that challenged existing assumptions about how different species could relate. The paper generated significant interest and led to conference invitations. Mountain Haven was becoming known not just as a rescue facility, but as an institution contributing valuable insights to scientific understanding of animal behavior and cognition. As February arrived and winter's worst began to ease, both animals were healthy, content, and deeply bonded. Scout had grown considerably from a tiny 3-month-old abandoned at the sanctuary. Though still small compared to adult cats, the white kitten's personality had fully blossomed in the secure environment Ghost provided. Scout was confident, playful, affectionate, and showed none of the behavioral issues often developing in animals with traumatic early experiences. Ghost's transformation was even more profound. The emotionally distant snow leopard, who had spent 2 years staring at mountains, had become active, responsive, and remarkably gentle. His trauma was not forgotten, but was no longer the defining factor in his existence. Scout had given Ghost something to care about beyond his grief. Staff who had worked with Ghost since arrival often found themselves emotional when reflecting on the journey. Kevin would sometimes sit at the observation area and watch Ghost and Scout together, marveling at what love and companionship could heal. The renovation completion neared, and excitement built throughout the sanctuary. The new space would give Ghost and Scout room to continue developing their relationship while providing better safety features. But perhaps more importantly, their habitat would serve as a living laboratory where researchers could study this remarkable bond, generating insights that might improve care for captive animals worldwide. Ghost and Scout had no awareness of their impact. They simply continued their daily routine of companionship, play, shared meals, and quiet morning sessions on the observation rock, where a massive snow leopard and tiny white kitten sat together, looking at Montana mountains and the world beyond. The habitat renovation was completed in late March, as Montana winter finally released its grip. The transformation was remarkable. What had been functional but basic was now a sophisticated environment catering to both a snow leopard and domestic cat. The new space was 3 times larger, incorporating varied terrain with rocky outcroppings, several caves, multiple water features, and carefully designed vegetation providing cover and visual interest. The heated den expanded into interconnected rooms. The main chamber featured raised platforms at multiple heights, soft surfaces, and large windows providing natural light while maintaining temperature control. A smaller adjacent room was scaled specifically for Scout, with cat-sized furniture, scratching posts, and cozy hiding spots. A third room served as a feeding station. The entire complex maintained perfect temperature and could be monitored remotely through advanced cameras. The transfer to the new habitat was conducted with extraordinary care. Both animals were moved simultaneously to avoid separation stress. Ghost was coaxed into a large transport carrier using treats, with Scout voluntarily following inside. When the carrier door opened in their new space, both emerged cautiously. Ghost immediately began a systematic inspection, walking perimeter and investigating every feature. Scout followed closely, occasionally darting ahead but always returning to Ghost's side. After approximately 30 minutes, Ghost located the new observation rock and climbed to its highest point. He surveyed the area, pale green eyes taking the familiar mountain view from this new vantage point. Then he settled into resting position, and Scout immediately climbed beside him. The transition was complete. Over following weeks, Ghost and Scout explored every aspect of their expanded environment. Ghost rediscovered behaviors he might have learned from his mother. He climbed to high vantage points and scanned his territory with focused attention. He marked strategic locations with scent, establishing ownership. He used varied terrain to practice stalking and pouncing techniques on enrichment toys. The additional space and environmental complexity awakened instincts that captivity had suppressed. Scout's favorite feature was the climbing structure connecting ground level to elevated platforms. The kitten spent hours navigating these pathways, developing impressive agility. Despite having dedicated spaces, Scout continued preferring wherever Ghost was, treating the massive snow leopard as the center of his universe. The new educational viewing area opened to visitors in mid-April. Response was immediate and overwhelming. People traveled from across the country and internationally to see Ghost and Scout, to witness the impossible bond many had read about. The viewing area was designed to minimize animal stress. Glass barriers prevented sound transmission. Visitor numbers were strictly limited. Quiet hours were enforced during morning observations. Educational materials told the complete story. Ghost's rescue from traffickers and emotional isolation were explained. Scout's abandonment and persistent determination to be near Ghost were documented through photographs and video. The challenges of allowing their relationship and safety measures making it possible were discussed honestly. Visitors' reactions to seeing them together in person were often emotional. Many cried watching the massive snow leopard gently grooming the tiny white kitten or observing Scout fearlessly climbing on Ghost's back, while the predator moved with exaggerated care. Parents used Ghost and Scout as examples of compassion and how love could transcend differences. The exhibit became one of the sanctuary's most popular and impactful educational programs. The documentary, filmed over winter, was completed and premiered at a film festival in May. Footage captured moments even dedicated staff had not witnessed. Sequences of Ghost teaching Scout to navigate rocky terrain by demonstrating foot placement, then patiently waiting as the kitten copied his movements. Remarkable footage of thunderstorm where Scout became frightened and Ghost immediately curled around the kitten, using his bulk as sound insulation until the storm passed. Perhaps most touching was footage showing Ghost's morning routine on a day. When Scout was sleeping in, Ghost began his usual walk to the observation rock, but stopped halfway, looked back toward the den, then returned to lie beside the sleeping kitten rather than complete his normal routine. The documentary received widespread attention and awards. More importantly, it sparked conversations throughout the zoo and sanctuary community about animal welfare practices, the importance of social bonds for psychological health, and how facilities could better accommodate emotional needs. Several institutions reached out to learn from Mountain Haven's experience. Ghost and Scout became ambassadors, not just for snow leopard conservation, but for a more compassionate and psychologically informed approach to captive animal management. As summer arrived, both animals adapted routines to changing conditions. Ghost's thick coat was less comfortable in heat, so he spent more time in shade and made greater use of water features. Scout discovered he enjoyed water much more than most domestic cats, often wading in shallow pools. Ghost seemed bemused but would position himself nearby whenever Scout was in water, ready to intervene if needed. A remarkable development came in June, when Scout attempted to scale a challenging rock face leading to a high point. Halfway up, Scout encountered a section where holes were too far apart for his small size. The kitten became stuck, unable to move up or down, and began vocalizing distress with increasingly urgent cries. Ghost, resting approximately 50 feet away, immediately responded. The snow leopard covered the distance in seconds and positioned himself below Scout. Ghost then climbed the rock face himself, moving slowly until positioned just below the stranded kitten. Using his body as a bridge, Ghost allowed Scout to step onto his back and climb down to safety. What made this rescue particularly significant was the planning and problem-solving it required. Ghost had to assess the situation, recognize Scout needed help, determine how to provide help given physical constraints, and execute a solution requiring precise positioning and movement control. October brought an unexpected challenge, testing their bond in new ways. Scout developed a respiratory infection requiring medical intervention. Dr. Matthews determined Scout needed separation from Ghost for several days to receive intensive treatment in the veterinary clinic. This would be the longest separation since the 3 days of barrier separation months earlier. Staff were concerned about how both would respond, but Scout's health had to be priority. The separation was accomplished as gently as possible. Scout was coaxed into a carrier with treats. Ghost immediately recognized something was wrong. His body language shifted from relaxed to tense, and he began vocalizing urgently. When Kevin and Dr. Matthews moved toward the exit with Scout's carrier, Ghost followed, staying as close as safety protocols allowed. As Scout was taken away, Ghost released a vocalization none of the staff had heard before, a mournful sound, plaintive and filled with what could only be described as grief. During the 3 days of Scout treatment, Ghost's behavior regressed dramatically. The snow leopard stopped eating, refused enrichment activities, and spent most time lying near the gate where Scout had been carried out. Ghost's morning routine of going to his observation rock was abandoned. He remained close to areas where Scout had frequently spent time, as if hoping the kitten would reappear. Staff were deeply concerned about this regression after nearly a year of remarkable progress. Ghost's attachment to Scout appeared so profound that separation caused immediate psychological collapse. On the 3rd day, when Scout's condition improved enough that continued hospitalization was no longer strictly necessary, Dr. Matthews decided to return him earlier than planned. She would continue treatments through daily check-ins. The reunion was emotional, even by the standards of their already remarkable relationship. When Scout's carrier was brought into the habitat and opened, the young white cat immediately ran to Ghost, vocalizing urgently. Ghost responded with a series of chuffs and began grooming Scout with frantic thoroughness, as if checking every inch to ensure he was truly unharmed. Scout pressed against Ghost, purring loudly enough to be heard throughout the observation area. For several minutes, both animals were completely absorbed in each other, the relief and joy at being reunited obvious. Over hours and days following the reunion, both returned to normal functioning. Ghost resumed eating, returned to his observation rock routine, and regained the confident, engaged demeanor he had developed. Scout's recovery accelerated, and within a week he was completely healthy. As November arrived and the first significant snows began falling, Ghost and Scout settled into their normal winter pattern. Morning observations on a rock with Scout, riding on Ghost's back or snuggled his fur. Afternoon play sessions in snow, with Ghost creating paths for Scout. Evenings in the heated den, with both comfortable in shared space. The routine was predictable but deeply satisfying. They had found their rhythm, their way of being together that honored both differences and connection. The Sanctuary's board met in December to review the first full year. Dr. Kitten presented comprehensive data covering health markers, behavioral observations, veterinary records, and psychological assessments. The conclusion was unambiguous. By every measurable standard, both were thriving. Ghost's transformation, from emotionally unreachable trauma victim to responsive, engaged animal with healthy social bonds, exceeded everyone's most optimistic hopes. Scout had developed into a confident, healthy young cat with remarkable resilience. Based on findings, the board made their decision official and permanent. Ghost and Scout would remain together indefinitely. Their habitat would continue receiving necessary modifications. Staff assignments and monitoring protocols will be maintained. Research access will continue under controlled conditions. Most importantly, Ghost and Scout's relationship will be recognized as a legitimate family bond, deserving the same respect and protection afforded to biological parent and offspring. It was unprecedented, but right. These two animals had chosen each other, and that choice would be honored. As the year drew to a close, the Sanctuary organized a small celebration for staff who had witnessed this extraordinary journey. Kevin spoke about first seeing Ghost show interest in anything. Dr. Matthews reflected on medical evidence of healing beyond physical health. Dr. Morgan discussed scientific implications. Dr. Kitten reminded everyone, this was not just about two animals, but a lesson about remaining open to possibilities, trusting animals to sometimes know what they need better than human experts, and how love could manifest in the most unexpected ways. Winter deepened, and daily routines continued with small variations, keeping life interesting but not stressful. Ghost remained attentive to Scout's needs and safety. Scout remained playful and affectionate, treating Ghost with a combination of respect and familiar ease, perfectly balancing their relationship. The documentary broadcast on a major nature channel in January reached millions. Response was overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in from people worldwide who had been moved. Many shared their own experiences with unlikely animal friendships. Teachers requested educational materials. Conservation organizations reported increased interest in snow leopard protection. The impact rippled far beyond expectations. As spring arrived again, completing the full cycle of seasons Ghost and Scout had experienced together, the Sanctuary prepared for additional construction projects. The success of their habitat inspired plans for specialized enclosures housing other animals with unique needs. Ghost and Scout had demonstrated that, with careful planning, appropriate resources, and willingness to think creatively, sanctuaries could provide more than physical care. They could provide social and emotional support, just as vital as food, shelter, and medical treatment. On a warm April morning, Ghost and Scout were in their usual positions on the observation rock. Ghost was looking at the mountains, pale green eyes distant but not empty, as they once had been. Scout was beside him, grooming his white fur. A light breeze moved through the habitat, carrying scents of spring and renewal. After several minutes of peaceful stillness, Scout finished grooming and moved closer to Ghost. The young cat pressed his head against the snow leopard's front leg, purring softly. Ghost lowered his own head and gently nuzzled Scout's ear. To an observer watching from the viewing area, the scene might have seemed simple, just two animals resting on a sunny morning. But to anyone who knew their story, who understood what each had survived and how they found each other. The scene represented something profound. Ghost had lost his mother to violence and spent years trapped in grief. Scout had been abandoned by humans who should have cared for him. Both had experienced the trauma of rejection and loss, and both had somehow found in each other exactly what they needed to heal. Ghost had taught Scout about patience, quiet strength, and being present. The snow leopard provided protection and guidance. Scout had taught Ghost about joy, about living rather than existing, about opening his heart despite the risk of future pain. The kitten provided companionship and purpose, giving Ghost reason to engage with life. Dr. Chen stood at the observation area, watching with the same wonder she felt during their first encounter over a year ago. She thought about regulations and protocols that could have prevented this relationship from developing. She thought about how easy it would have been to separate them after Scout's initial escape, to play it safe and avoid criticism or risk. And she was grateful that she and her team had been willing to take a chance, to trust that these two animals might know better than humans what they needed to thrive. The story had already inspired changes in how captive animal welfare was understood, but perhaps its most important impact was more personal. For everyone who learned about the snow leopard and kitten, their relationship served as a reminder that connection could transcend differences that seemed insurmountable, that healing was possible even after profound trauma, that family was defined not by blood or species, but by the choice to care for another being. As the sun climbed higher, Ghost shifted position slightly on the rock. Scout, half asleep, adjusted accordingly, maintaining contact with his enormous companion. Ghost's tail moved in slow, gentle rhythm, its black tip resting across Scout's back. The snow leopard's breathing was slow and steady. The young cat's purring was a soft, constant sound. Two heartbeats, radically different in size and strength, beating in comfortable synchronicity. Two lives impossibly intertwined, creating something beautiful from what should have been a tragic ending for both. And in that moment, on that rock with Montana mountains, standing eternal in the distance, Ghost was no longer haunted by the past. Scout was no longer alone. They were simply together, which was everything either of them needed to be.